Thank you very much for this interview.
My pleasure.
Welcome in Greece. In
Thank
Athens.
you.
I would like to start from Turkey. Turkey violated Greece's sovereign rights several times, as it is our point of view. And I would like to ask NATO's opinion on Turkey's violation in those rights.
Well, you know, from a NATO perspective, we are really valuing our ally here in Greece. You've been a member of the alliance now since 1952. It will soon be coming on 70 years. So we value Greece as an ally who has really provided for security and stability in this region. By the same token, we value Turkey very much. And so when there are differences between allies from the NATO headquarters, we do everything we can to try to help solve the problem, to offer our support to the governments here in Athens and in Ankara, and to try to help to bring the two sides together. But in the end of the day, NATO as NATO, we really stand for the unity and the stability of the alliance, having a good mutual relationship among allies, and so that's what we are pushing.
The maritime borders between Greece and Turkey are clear for NATO.
Well, indeed, the maritime borders have long been determined, and we do not, again, in any way take a position on those maritime borders. They exist.
Yes, I can understand it, and I can understand the meaning of your answer and your role and NATO's role, but the borders are clear for NATO or not?
Well, we stand essentially for the rule of law in the NATO alliance, and I don't know what else I can tell you. We are really intent on ensuring that our allies, if they have differences of opinion among them, that they work through them. But NATO is an alliance that stands for the rule of law, and from our perspective, that's clear.
In Cyprus, in the Cyprus exclusive economic zone, we have issues. The last days, you know them, and I would like your comment about what happened with the drilling rig from Italy, the ship from Italy, and the Turkish ships.
Well, from the perspective, again, of the NATO alliance, we watch when such incidents occur, and we are concerned that there not be, from that incident, or accidents that may occur, that there may not be an escalation and leading to crisis. We don't want to see that. In fact, what we want to see is problem solving. And as a NATO, principle, we are always looking for ways to solve problems if they exist among allies. I'm not going to say that being members of the NATO alliance means that every member of the alliance suddenly is completely happy with every other member of the alliance. There are disputes all the time between and among allies in the NATO alliance, but we try to say that because of the overarching interests we all have in the success of this defensive alliance as it contributes to security and stability for the Euro-Atlantic region, we have to find ways to work through these problems. And that's what we do from NATO headquarters. We try to find ways to work through these problems. And so if you're going to ask me again, to take one side or another in a dispute, I won't do it, no matter who it is inside the alliance.
I know, and it's clear to me now, I think to everybody, that you represent NATO, not the United Nations. But the situation is not good, and we all worried about what may happen in the Aegean Sea. Are you afraid too?
Well, what we have seen in the Aegean is a good NATO operation in that in the Eastern Aegean over the last 4 or 5 years we have been able to slow down the uncontrolled flow of migrants, and that's been for us a kind of good example of how the coast guards of Greece and Turkey, working together with several naval ships from NATO countries, have been able to contribute to the overall security of Europe in helping to control migrant flows so that you know, it's been a difficult problem, very difficult problem for Greece, I know, to manage this issue, and so NATO can contribute in that way.
Mm-hmm. But my question was about an incident in the Aegean Sea. Are you afraid that we may have an incident between Greek and Turkish ships?
Well, we always must be concerned about incidents. I want to stress that from a NATO perspective, we've been watching incidents in the Baltic and Black Sea now for several years, becoming more heightened as the Russian Federation brings more and more capability to bear in forward areas such as in Kaliningrad up in the Baltic Sea area and in Crimea in the Black Sea. So we always watch very, very sharply. I think the main point among NATO allies is we want to avoid any kind of situation where there could be a heightened situation of tension. And again, the emphasis on problem solving and avoidance of incidents. That's why it was so, I think, positive the day after the incident in the Aegean between the Coast Guard vessels of Greece and Turkey, that the prime ministers called each other. The Greek and Turkish prime ministers spoke by phone and put all the emphasis on avoiding escalation and taking down the level of tension. And that is the type of approach that NATO will always encourage.
I want your comment about the Turkish operation in Syria.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, I was in Turkey at the end of January, and I got a thorough briefing on their view of the rationale for the operation. They have also been very transparent in briefing NATO. The North Atlantic Council has been briefed now several times. So from our point of view, the first and important thing is to have a transparent flow of information from Turkey so we understand what their point of view is. We say they have legitimate security concerns, and they have been affected among all the NATO allies. They have been affected quite profoundly by the terrorism threat over some period of years now. So we do understand from a certain perspective, but again, with NATO's emphasis on the rule of law, we always stress the necessity of proportionality and limitation of an operation in scope and in temporal terms, in terms of time. So those are the other messages that we've been really clear in conveying to Ankara. In other circumstances, they have to address, other allies. The United States, for example, and Turkey have been talking quite intensively about what to do in order to lessen tension in the area and resolve the concerns that Turkey has. That bilateral work must continue. Again, it's not for NATO to conduct those negotiations, but we can continue to impart some really clear messages about proportionality and the rule of law.
So do you support in any way the Turkish operation, NATO, I mean?
What we say and we emphasize is that Turkey has legitimate security concerns to address, but we do also stress that as they are addressing them, they must continue to bear in mind the necessity of preventing civilian casualties, for example. That's part of the meaning of proportionality, and emphasizing to end the operation as soon as possible.
What is NATO's position in the Skopje issue?
Well, Skopje and the name issue with regard to Fyrom is part of the larger, as we think of it, basket of issues surrounding the Bucharest summit, where we determined,
2008.
In 2008, so 2018 is an important year. It's 10 years.
10 years after.
And we determined certain countries would be, we'd be focusing on working with regard to advancing NATO's open door. So Skopje is not the only story here. It's also Bosnia and Herzegovina, it's Georgia, it's Ukraine. So from our perspective, that's the Bucharest summit statement, and we have renewed that statement in both Wales and Warsaw. So it's very much a living document from our perspective, and we continue to want to underscore the principle that NATO has an open door and that countries should be able to choose their own security relationships. There shouldn't be any zero-sum game. So those are other important messages. It's up to Skopje to decide what their security relationship should be. But we've also made it very, very clear that we cannot move forward on the open door with Skopje until the name issue is resolved. This is not unique to NATO, it's also where the EU is as well. So we see it as being very valuable for both the transatlantic alliance, but also for the European Union to, keep those messages front and center. And we hope that it will give an impetus to move the negotiations forward.
Do you think that it's crucial for Skopje stability to be a member of NATO?
We think it would be very good for security and stability in the Western Balkans. Again, back to that point that security and stability provide for economic prosperity. Until you have security and stability, until you have secure borders, until you can count on some predictability in the overall security environment, it's hard to get continuing and solid economic growth and prosperity. So we see it as good for the whole region of the Western Balkans and for Greece as well if this issue can be resolved.
The time frame for all of that?
Well, we hope sooner rather than later, but it's not up to us. The pace of the negotiations is designated elsewhere.
Okay. And the last, do you have any plans for new bases, NATO bases, in Greece?
That is a matter that will be entirely up to the Greek government to make a proposal. There's an adaptation of the NATO command structure going on. There are already a number of NATO facilities and bases here in Greece. They get a lot of use, for example, the training center at Suda Bay, and we also are operating a forward operating base for the AWACS here in Greece. So there are already long-standing facilities here. If the Greek government has proposals for anything new, then we'll hear them out.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was an honor for me to be here with you. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.